I'd love to know, given your lens on the market, what advice you would give an entrepreneur to avoid some of these disasters, I'll call them. But does that sound good? I've got four of them.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So the first one isn't relevant for your type of business, but I know you've certainly studied other competitors in the private equity space that do this. And that is that they buy a business and apply too much debt to the business, and that the business then is unable to pay back the loan, and the business goes into receivership as a result, or gets taken over by the bank. I just did an interview. It'll go live, in fact, the week prior to our interview going live, with a guy named Mark Zweig, and Mark sold his company to a private equity group. In fact, the number was 10 million. He got 8 million in cash, roll two. Ultimately, the two was lost because the mezzanine financer that financed the deal foreclosed on the business and took all the equity. How do entrepreneurs avoid that, other than selling to Valsoft, because you guys don't use debt? Yeah. What else would you tell me if we were just having a drink at a bar? Like, what do I do to make sure that that doesn't happen to me?
I mean, look, I'm very, very, very sure that not a lot of entrepreneurs, or at least there's some number of entrepreneurs that don't even know the financing structure that goes into their deal. So the number one thing is ask the question and be aware of it, right? That's
how much debt are you going to use to buy my business?
Yeah, exactly. How much debt? What covenants are there? Those are all things that like you're entitled to know. Like,
describe a covenant for folks who don't know that word. What do you mean by covenant?
So like when someone lends you money on a either quarterly basis or semi-annual basis or yearly basis, they're going to check some ratio. The ratio could be how much they lent you versus how much revenue, or how much they lent you versus how much profit you made during that period. And if you're above that ratio, if it's a negative covenant, then the lender has a right to ask you to fix that problem, and ultimately the right to take your business, right? So if your ratio is 4 times debt to profit, and your profit, just goes down that year, and you're at 5 times, then they're not going to take your business immediately, but they're going to start asking questions, and ultimately could take the business. But if the ratio is 4 times, and when you sold the business to them, it's 1 times, then the profit would have to like go down dramatically for it to be a problem. So it would be less of a problem, in the grand scheme of things. So to be aware of those things, first of all, every buyer will give you the information. None of them want to hide it or anything like that, but I think very few people ask. Right?
Such a good point, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they hear, XYZ private equity company is buying my business. They don't always think that XYZ private equity company is in turn levering up their business. They might think, oh, well, they're going to borrow some money, but it's against XYZ's balance sheet. And in fact, it's not. It's against your company's balance sheet in most cases. And therefore, you've got to understand, does your company have the capacity to meet the covenants that are going to be put in place and pay that? Yeah. And that oftentimes starts entrepreneurs down this road of, well, why am I selling to a private equity group? If I'm going to have to live by this covenant anyways, I don't need the intermediary. I can just go borrow money from the bank and expand my business that way.
Yeah. Yeah, you could. You may not have the resources or the capacities to, but ultimately, if you do, you could. Yeah.
Second scenario.